It's day 2 of High Elf Week, a week that we didn't know was happening up until about 6 p.m. yesterday. But we have got all of the leaks, all of the rules now for the new High Elf Arcane Journal. And I got to tell you, the future is here. And the future is toughness for elves. The main problem I've had when writing high elf lists, and I don't just mean competitively, I mean talking about writing for friends who are getting into the hobby, just playing, trying to find fun lists to play with high elves, is that you find the character points are so good, and then everything else is kind of underwhelming, and it doesn't feel like it does much. And this Arcane Journal definitely gives you the tools to get around that, which is one of the reasons I'm actually quite excited about it. Here's the problem. Elves are expensive, low wound, squishy models. I don't love that combination. And they also don't hit as hard as they maybe should do. You know, your sword masters having 1 attack, your white lions having 1 attack, your silver helms being strength 3. They're not bad, but they definitely feel like they're lacking a little bit of oomph. So how do we get around that? Well, the new banner is fantastic for doing so, and it doesn't necessarily boost their output, or although there are ways to boost output that we'll get to a little bit later on in the video, but it means that you can have a unit that doesn't die as easily, and I think that's really important when you're playing around with expensive dragons. You want the rest of your list to not immediately fall over, otherwise your opponent just leaves you with a dragon, and there's not really much else they can do. So let's have a look at how this all shapes up. The first, and I'd argue key part of the puzzle, is the Banner of Resilience. This is 80 points. That is expensive, admittedly. You know, you can't take multiple of them. You're limited to taking it on your Battle Standard Bearer, unless you put it on Phoenix Guard. But while I think there is something there with Phoenix Guard, and I'm definitely going to play around with it, if you're going to take a big, expensive unit, you probably want that coming out of core. So which unit you put it on depends on whether you're going with, the Sea Guard detachment, the White Lion detachment, Grand Army. You might not want to put it in every list, but if you are wanting to put a tankier unit into your army that can take a little bit more punishment while your more expensive, faster aspects of the list do a lot of the heavy lifting, I think the Banner of Resilience is a great place to start. So 80 points gives +1 to toughness. Toughness 3 to toughness 4 is, in my opinion, a huge breakpoint. It means all of the incidental damage that's coming your way is suddenly shaved off. Yes, things like lances and great weapons are still going to wound you on 2s, or maybe 3s, depending if your opponent is strength 3 or strength 4 base. So, it can have an effect there. Dragons are still going to wound you on 2s, yes. However, previously, if you had a tanky unit that was, you wanted to take a brick of elves for whatever reason, or a big unit of silver helms, you were going to struggle because Fireball was going to wound you on 3s, and then, you're taking a lot of damage. There's the potential there. You just fail some armor saves and you've lost some quite expensive models. Obviously, we're only moving at 1 point. You're going from wounding on 3s to 4s, but that's for everything. Incoming shooting attacks. If you're being shot by loads of strength 3 shooting, obviously there's poison shooting blocks in the meta. Not super effective at shooting at infantry, but if that's the best thing that they can shoot at, you don't want them to, take all of the damage available. So Banner Resilience gets you up to T4, and that's going to be very big. Obviously, you can put it on characters that have a higher toughness anyway. We'll talk about that later on down the line. But I think a good place to put this is into a bunker, for example, White Lions, or you can do Sisters of Avalon is another one that comes to mind. The one that's really speaking to me are Silver Helms. What else can we do to layer defenses on this unit? Well, there's the obvious one, 25 points for the Lawmaster's Cloak. Talisman, you can put this on unit champions, any of them that can have, 25 points of magic items, and this is probably a good place to put it, although there are other options that we can talk about. If you've got points in your character allotment to fit this in, maybe you do something else. But this gives the unit and the bearer and the unit they've joined a 4 ward save against magic missiles. Obviously fantastic. What does this do? This means that a fireball against T3 models, 66% of those are going to go through. You're wounding on 3s. Let's say you haven't got an armor save, just for the sake of the comparison. Going up to T4, you go from 66% to 50%. Only half of the wounds taken on a 4-up to wound. And then with a 4-up ward save, you half that again. You're going to 25% of wounds taken. So you're taking not quite, but it's somewhere between like 2 and 3 times less damage than you would take for a magic missile like Fireball. It doesn't deal with Pillar of Fire. This is the big downside to Lawmaster's Cloak, and one of the big things that has kind of kept this from being, I don't want to say a problem, but from being too strong a part of an elf list is Pillar of Fire wreaks havoc on elves because, Strength 3, T3, wounding on 4s, AP 2, you're taking a lot of elves down to either no save or, in the case of Silver Helms, down to a 5-up save, which I don't love. Here, you're taking them from wounding on 4s to 5s, and that isn't going to magically make Pillar of Fire not hurt you, but it is one of those, just takes it up a notch. You're going to take less damage from Pillar of Fire on average. You're going to take less damage from all of the magic missiles. It's just another layer that you can add on top to try and make it so that you're not taking too much incidental damage. The third and final part of the support that I want to be layering on a unit is probably going to be a caster. Obviously, character support is important, and it depends which army you're going with, which unit you're going with. Obviously, we're going to be taking a BSB. I'm going to talk about those after the units because there's 3 different ones you can take, and I think there's different ways you can go. And you can also run it unsupported, but we'll get to that afterwards. So let's talk about the caster support. And a caster is a fantastic place to put a Spell Eater Axe as well if you want to get Magic Resist 2 into your sort of big Death Star bunker. But which caster are you looking at? So we've got a new caster in the Stormweaver, and I think the Stormweaver is interesting, and there are some versions of this list that might want to take the Stormweaver over anything else. So the Stormweaver gives you Dark Magic, which is the main draw to them, because you lose the Lilith's Blessing, which gives you a reroll on the Archmage, and you're also only a level 3 caster. So you're casting, you've got less spells known, you probably have to take a Lore Familiar. You can't play around with the Silvery Wand in the way that you could with an Archmage. But you're less of an effective caster, and you've got less points that you can put into magic items. So the Stormweaver is only really there if you want to take Dark Magic, or if your army doesn't allow you to take a level 4 caster, like the Seaguard Garrison. Is Dark Magic going to be the right choice? Sometimes, I think. I'm leaning away from it. It's definitely not the one that I'm immediately going for. But if we just have a quick look at the lore here, as you can see, we've got Word of Pain, which is a fantastic hex, 18-inch range, which is a good range for a hex, and it probably wants to be paired with the White Lion, so this is a good range to be able to cast your spells at. Gives the enemy unit -1 strength and toughness. This is quite nice. Comboed with the banner, because if they're -1 strength and you're +1 toughness, effectively they're wounding you at 2 less. Now, dragons and T7, strength 7 stuff isn't going to be affected, but anything that's strength 6 or worse is going to be wounding you less of the time, so that's quite nice. You've got a couple of assailments in there, which are fine. They're not particularly exciting. You've got Infernal Gateway, which is not awful. Sometimes you've got it in the back pocket to get the dragon out of a combat it doesn't want to be in, but I'm not super excited about it. Mostly you're taking it for Battle Lust. Obviously, Phantasmagoria is there as well. Battle Lust, unfortunately not a ranged self-spell, and that is a big downside of it, and something that you have to genuinely consider, because if your unit is locked in combat, you can't cast it on yourself. However, the buff is very good, so if you think you're going to get the charge off, giving them Frenzy and Hatred all enemies is really solid. You go from 1 attack hitting on 3s to 2 attacks hitting on 3s re-rolling. I think you increase your effectiveness by 300%. I'd have to run the numbers on it, but how many hits you get out of a unit goes up exponentially. It's a massive boost. Being able to re-roll the hits on top of getting an extra hit means that you're just getting so much more damage out of them, and that is really solid. But it doesn't give you any defensive buffs, and I'm kind of sure I need to play around with whether defensive buffs are important for this list, because you're already getting them to strength 4, you're already giving them a ward save against magic missiles. Maybe you don't need to bother with a defensive buff. And Word of Pain is in a way a defensive buff, because you can hex a specific enemy unit if that one goes off. So for me, Stormweaver, I'm not super jazzed about in the context of this unit, but it is an option if you want to make sure the army hits a little bit harder. Just very quickly to point out, if you give your unit Frenzy, they are going to overrun. So if you're putting a lot of points into a Death Star, you lose a lot of the use of it, because you can't just kill something turn, set up to kill something on the next turn. You're going to be killing less things. You're going to be hitting very hard, but you're going to be killing less things because you're going to be overrunning and you're not going to have the charge outs on your next turn. Something to consider. That leaves us with the Archmage, and I think the Archmage is a more appealing buy. Unless you specifically want Dark Magic, I'm going to be looking at the Archmage instead. So something that you can take that the Stormweaver can't is you can take the Honours. You're locked out of Honours on the Stormweaver. It's not really the end of the world, but if you wanted to go for an illusion caster, being able to take, for example, a tracing Great Blade, so you can have a really nice spectral doppelganger, albeit at lower initiative. That's really solid. This is just an option that gives you, that opens up the playfield. And also, if you're playing in Grand Army, maybe you go for the whatever the Swordmaster one is, the one that gives you the Sword of Heath. Sword of Heath, obviously an incredible weapon as well. So having the option to take the on is just really nice here. You're level 4, so you're casting more reliably. You've got Lilith's Blessing, re-rolling a single failed cast once per turn. That's obviously really nice. So you've got a lot of buffs there over the Stormweaver. So if you can take one and it suits and you don't want to take Dark Magic, this is where I'm looking. The laws that you can take as well are really nice. So obviously Elemental and Illusion you can take on the Stormweaver as well. Both of those are fine. I don't think Illusion is it for me. I'm not feeling it. Unless you're going for a... you could go for a Seaguard Death Star, a big unit of Seaguard backed up by Chavez, giving them the AP1 for all of their attacks, getting them up to T4 with this banner. It's a lot of character support that you're putting in there, which is a little bit concerning. But, that is one of the things that you could do. That's one of the ways you could build it. Elementalism, probably not for me unless I'm going that sort of option. Illusion, that is an appealing thought. You get the control spells, which when you're a foot character or a mounted character inside a unit, not as good. You haven't got the 360-degree line of sight to drop that Miasmic Mirage on the dragon that's, sat in your flank at the start of your turn. So that is a little bit of a problem. But Glittering Robes is just a genuinely good rule. If you cast Glittering Robes on yourself, range self spell, you can cast it while in combat. It's got a low casting value. You're getting -1 to be hit, and that stacks really nicely with a +1 toughness, because again, unless your opponent is strength 7, you're effectively -1 to hit and -1 to wound, which is just a really strong level of defense to layer on a unit that can already have probably a decent armor save. So, Illusion, one of the options. Obviously, it lets you do Spectral Doppelganger. I'm not sold on Spectral Doppelganger necessarily as a super competitive spell, especially now that it's been changed that your strikes last really is punished. But it's an option there, and, if you're taking Illusion for the Glittering Robes, I'm going to be taking Spectral Doppelganger in an axe every time, and I'm going to try and punk some fools with some high-strength, high-AP auto hits. That leaves us with the other two, High Magic and Illusion. And High Magic and Battle Magic. I think there's two different ways you can go. I think Battle Magic is probably the safer bet. But let's have a look at High Magic first. So High Magic, the main spell you're going to be wanting to look at here is Walk Between Worlds. It's cast on a 10, which is, a little risky. So you're probably going to want to cast this with some level of increased reliability, whether that's a power scroll or some other buff. It is range self, so even if you're in combat, you can cast it. However, with the FAQ that came in 8 months ago now, you can't cast it on the turn you charge. So it gives you Ethereal and Reserve move. These are both really nice, especially if you're a slower brick. If you're playing a unit of, ranked up infantry, being able to reserve move and get an open order pivot twice if you are open order, or just being able to, move, shoot, move again, really solid. The benefit that it gives you is mostly for the Ethereal, because that's going to shut down most of the damage coming at you, basically with the exception of Pillar of Fire and Magic Missiles. And if you're taking the Lawmaster's Cloak, you're going to be not immune, but you're not going to be worried about the output of Magic Missiles, because you're going to be taking, you've got a 4 ward save against those. Some armies do have a lot of magical attacks just built in. Warriors of Chaos is the obvious one. However, sucks. Sometimes your buff just doesn't come off. And I think this is interesting, but I think it means that you just lose games to Warriors of Chaos, because between the Infernal Puppet, where you're casting on a 3d6 and dropping the highest dice, that's going to be making it very difficult for you to get Walk Between Worlds off. And also the fact that their hand weapons are AP1 and ignore the magical attacks already. I think I'd be very worried about playing into Warriors of Chaos. And Warriors of Chaos are one of the better armies in the game, so it's a little bit of a concern that I've got here. However, you do have 2 other buffs. While you can't be Ethereal on the turn you charge, you can give yourself Shield of Safri for a 5-up ward save. It falls off at the end of your turn, so it's not as good as Battle Magic in that regard. And you've also got Fury of Cain, giving you +1 attack. So this is it gives you a very specific play style. You want to not engage until you've got your buffs up, and then as soon as you've got your buffs up, your Fury of Cain and your Shield of Safri, you want to go in and hit hard. If you're charged, if you're locked in combat, you can't cast Fury of Cain and Shield of Safri, so you're not going to get those conditional buffs, but you can cast Walk Between Worlds. So it does kind of come out in the wash. I'm just really worried about the matchup into Warriors of Chaos, and I'm not really sure that I want to go for that one. So that does leave us with possibly the best lore in the game, Battle Magic. Now, Battle Magic does have two good damage spells, which is maybe not what you're going to want to lean into. If you've got this sort of Death Star, often you're going to be marching them, so you're probably not going to be playing around with Pillar of Fire and Fireball. Curse of Arrow Attraction and Curse of Cowardly Flight, both honestly not going to be doing a huge amount for you in this sort of list, unless you're going with Sea Guard, in which case Curse of Arrow Attraction is, solid. But if I'm going for that sort of list, I'm probably taking Elementalism anyway. So that leaves us with Arcane Urgency and Oaken Shield, and then Hammerhand. Now, Hammerhand isn't going to win you games on its own, but it is just a nice little damage buff, that if you get it off. 2d3, Strength 4, AP2 hits. There is a magic item now that you can put into the unit that lets you cast Hammerhand as a bound spell. So you can put quite a lot of output in. Something that you might find these Death Stars suffering from is not having quite as much punch as you want them to. So having 3 or 4 Hammerhands in there can be just enough to tip that over into, obviously I can charge you with a dragon, but anything else is going to take a surprising amount of pain as long as they don't have magic resist. The 2 spells that are really important, though. Oaken Shield to give you a 5-up ward save. Not conditional, just a 5-up ward save all of the time. Obviously, this does overlap with the Loremaster's Cloak, but a lot of stuff that's going to be coming at you isn't just a magic missile. And you don't have to cast it if you're playing against Warriors of Chaos and they're out of range to charge you next turn, but they're going to cast blue fire at you. You're just risking a miscast. But when they do charge you, you'll be glad to have that 5-up ward save. And then there's Arcane Urgency as well for the ability to double move. And this is, I think, possibly the strongest spell in the game. It's so strong to be able to move, especially a fast unit. This is something that if you're playing High Elves, you're probably going to have a very solid dragon a lot of the time. If you're double moving that dragon turn 1, that dragon's going to be in a place that's very difficult for your opponent to deal with. You've got a built-in reroll, so even though it is a casting value of a 10+, you've got a lot of reliability to be able to get that off more often than not. And then later turns, or even turn 1, if you want to get your Death Star in a particular spot, it gives you the ability to get up the board. You don't have Steed of Shadows, you don't have Demonology, which is a fantastic lore for a Death Star, but you can just march twice, and you've got a base movement 5 on your infantry, or base movement 8 on your silver helms. So you can move 20 inches with that unit of White Lions, and I think that is what makes this unit really going to shine. If you give them Arcane Urgency, if you give them that Oaken Shield, give them the reliability, give them the extra damage coming in from the Hammerhands, this is the way that I think it makes sense to build if you're going for a melee aggressive Death Star. So let's get to which units you might want to put this banner on. First of all, the obvious choice, the White Lions of Trace. If you're taking the Tracian Hunter's Detachment, the White Lions become core. You can take 1 unit per 1,000 points, but in this case, we're probably going to look at taking a bigger unit. These are obviously one of the harder hitting units. They're Strength 4 base. The Great Blades are +2 Strength, so it gets you up to Strength 6 AP3. They do have the downside of being strikes last, so unless you're getting the charge off, you're going to be hitting at Initiative 2 on the first round of combat, which is a bit of a downside. One of the strengths of Elves is sometimes you're going to be able to get in above other players. I don't think it's that much of a difference because realistically, you need to be initiative maybe 6 or 7 to make a big difference. But White Lions here, definitely one of the options that you can go with, and they hit reasonably hard. They do suffer a little bit in the squishiness department. Obviously, we're layering toughness buffs on them, but they do only have heavy armor. And yes, they get the Lion Cloaks, which gives them +1 to save against non-magical shooting, which is nice because you've already got some defensive output or defenses against magical shooting in the Loremaster's Cloak. But I think these models are going to fall over a little more quickly than I'm comfortable with. Not to say that it's a bad unit, and if you're taking them in the Tracian Warhost, you've got the option to put a wood, or, well, a bit of difficult terrain, which it doesn't specify what it is. I'm assuming wood is probably what we're going to go with. And you can use that to block line of sight in the middle of the board, so you can actually get your Death Star up. You can use it to screen off hills and things like that, which is nice. That is good. But I'm a little concerned about how squishy this unit is. They are pretty decent elite infantry, though, and if you're putting them in core, I think it's a solid unit. T4, Strength 4, Weapon Skill 5. It's just a solid infantry at not too high a cost as Elves go. Something to consider is that you can put the BSB on the Tracian Chieftain if you're in the correct detachment, and this is a little bit tougher. It's 3 wounds instead of 2. It doesn't make all that much difference, but you do have more magic item allotment as well. So maybe this is the direction you want to go with your BSB. If you're going for the tracing unit, I think it's a really solid model that you can put in. It just means that you're a little bit more likely to survive. You can comfortably put in the Seed of Rebirth, give them a regen. 3 wounds with a regen and an okay save is not terrible. And then you hit harder than you'd expect a normal noble to hit because you've got the Great Blade instead of just a normal Great Weapon. Moving on to the other Arcane Journal Army of Infamy, the Lothan Sea Guard are probably going to be your unit of choice if you're going for something in the Sea Guard host. I think these are fine. You'd want to put a lot of characters in is the problem. So you're going to want to put Aisha Vess in, I think, if you're going for the Sea Guard Death Star. And she gives you the +1 AP, which is quite a big offensive buff. And then you've got to make the most of that as well. So you're definitely going to want to put the BSB in, get them up to T4. But then on top of that, you are also going to have to deal with what you want to do in terms of magic support. And it becomes difficult because you can fit a noble and a level 4 and a dragon into a list quite easily. But you have to make some cuts. And obviously you can't take a dragon if you're running the Sea Guard detachment, but it makes it more difficult if you want to play around with Sea Guard in terms of just Grand Army, which is something you can do. So I think the points in characters become a little bit squeezed for the Sea Guard, but you can absolutely do it. And again, when we're talking about casters, you probably want to look at an Elementalism caster. I think that would be the most appealing for a Sea Guard unit. Getting the Plague of Rust off on the target that you're going to be shooting at so that you're effectively AP3 is really nice. Whether you take the Razor Standard as well on the unit, you can do. I'm not sure it's super worthwhile, but I think the Sea Guard are absolutely a viable choice, just not one that I'm super excited about. There are 2 more that I want to get to, but obviously, again, if you're talking about this unit, you're going to be potentially looking at the Garrison Commander instead of a Noble. You can go for a Noble because a Noble's 20 points cheaper. The Commander gives you Fire and Flee and Evasive. A lot of the time, I'm not sure you're going to want to use those with Sea Guard, but maybe there is a space for it that I'm not sort of seeing initially. And then your options as well. You get 75 points of magic items. You get worse weapons. You can't give them a great weapon. But if it's your BSB, you probably want to equip them defensively anyway. So this is one of the choices you can go with. I think I'm probably still leaning towards a Noble on a Silver Helm, just on an Elven Steed, something like that to give you a bit more defensive from the barding, and then put some regen and better save on them. The third infantry unit that you might want to play around with, and again, the reason that you might want to play around with it is that you can take it in core if you play around with restrictions, not taking a Lord on Dragon in terms of Grand Army. You could take a big bunker of Sisters of Avalon. And Sisters of Avalon are a really good unit. People are playing big units of them in core anyway. And one of the weaknesses is that they are incredibly squishy. So if you're going to put points into defending them, putting a Noble BSB in there to buff them up a little bit more might be a way that you want to go. I don't think there's a lot to say here. It's basically the same unit just with +1 toughness. I don't think it really changes how the unit plays. But this is one that I could see people running. This might end up being the most likely one to run just because I think there are a lot of restrictions in the 2 Arcane Journals, the 2 Armies of Infamy. So Sisters of Avalon is a build that we have seen in Grand Army already, so this might be the way that people go. Or also Silver Helms, which I'll get to in just a second. Now, Silver Helms. This is my pick for probably the unit I'm most interested in putting the banner on. And it gets them up to T4. So they still don't hit as hard as you might like. You can get around that we'll talk about that. But you get up to T4, you've got a 3-up armor save, and you're at 24 points per model. 28 per, I guess, if you count the banner in, roughly. That's not bad for heavy cavalry, and these are core heavy cavalry. And they hit at an okay, amount of damage, and you're going to have some character support in there as well. So for me, I think Silver Helms are really nice. You might want to buff them up with a ward save. Put in the Battle Magic caster and the Arcane Urgency. This is a unit that really benefits from Arcane Urgency. Being able to move 32 inches is pretty terrifying for a 500-point Death Star. And speaking of 500 points, if you go for, I think it's 18 models with full command, shields, and give the unit a 25-point magic banner and a 25-point magic item, that I believe that takes you to exactly 500 points. Which I'm pretty okay with for filling out my core. I think that's a really solid place to start. There's a couple of options that are really good in terms of the magic items. Obviously, you can put the Lawmaster's Cloak, or if you've got points, you can put that into your core. Because if we talk about the enchanted item, here we go. We've seen it before, the Ring of Fury, 25 points. The wielder of the Ring of Fury can cast Hammer Hand from the Lore of Battle as a bound spell with power level 2. This juices the unit's output quite significantly. Taking one is nice. Taking 2 or 3 of them can really make a difference. There are issues. If you play into a unit with magic resist, it does become difficult. It's only casting at +2, so if you haven't tied up their caster, again, it's not as good as you might want it to be. But it does get around issues like Infernal Puppet, which is something that I was worried about in terms of like the Warriors of Chaos matchup. If you've got 2 or 3 Rings of Fury and you go into a unit of Chaos Knights, or whatever point sink the Chaos player has used to fill up their non-character points, we'll say, the Ring of Fury is going to do a lot of work because you're wounding on 4s and they're down to a 5-up save. So you're doing a lot more damage than you would have done, and you get around the Infernal Puppet. They've just got their normal dispel. I think this is a really solid place to put Ring of Fury on character champions, but again, you probably want to go Lord Master's Cloak first. So it's only if you've got points in the character slot to fit this in, realistically. Onto the unit, yeah, like I say, I'm probably taking something along the lines of 18 of these with an upgrade. Banner-wise, there's a couple of good ones. You could take the Banner of Confidence, sorry, not the Banner of Confidence, the Banner of Balance, which is one of the new Arcane Journal ones. It turns off rerolls to hit or wound. You're not doing any rerolls to hit and wound, so you can turn off your opponent's rerolls to hit and wound. Funnily enough, it also turns off the Mark of Nurgle and similar spells where you have to reroll successful 6s to hit. So that's quite nice. It just makes you a little bit more consistent into those tough units that you might see. Or you could go for, in the High Elf book, I believe there's one that gives you move through cover for 25 points, which is fine. It depends on the sort of terrain setup that you're on. So if we look here, we've got the Banner of Illyrian. Yes, 20 points, gets you move through cover. Although then the points don't quite work out. I think, honestly, my favourite banner to go for would just be the War Banner. 25 points, give you +1 combat res. Really valuable, because when you've got a big unit of Silver Helms, a little bit of combat res is nice. You can only get 1 rank bonus, so you're sat at a static 3 from the rank, banner, and close order before you put any characters or magic banners in there as well. Honourable mention, we've got the Phoenix Guard and we've got the Swordmasters as well. Both of them have some upsides and downsides. Neither of them are in core, so I'm struggling to justify writing lists with them in, but, maybe down the line it's something that I'll play around with. Maybe there's a reason to take them. The main one is that Phoenix Guard can take a magic banner up to 100 points. So they could take the banner that gives them the toughness. They don't have to have the BSB. So while it's a very expensive non-core purchase, it ends up not taking points out of your character slot. So if you wanted to do stuff, get up close to that 1,000 points without using the banner, Phoenix Guard might be a place that you want to put a +1 toughness bunker in. They do have full plate, which is really nice. Gives them a 4-up save, even with their 2-handed halberds. Obviously, they attack in 2 ranks, so they are a pretty good, what's the word I'm looking for? A pretty good receptacle for dark magic, giving them frenzy. Obviously, the 2nd rank only makes a single supporting attack, but if you're getting 3 attacks instead of 1 from the equivalent of, say, Swordmasters, it's not too shabby. And something else to note as well is the Swordmasters have initiative 6, so that's their big sort of draw. If your opponent charges you, you're going to be initiative 7 on the first round of combat, so you're probably going to be striking first, or at least at the same time. Almost as important as which unit you're going to join the character to is which character are you going to put the BSB on. I personally think the High Elf Noble it's my number 1 choice. You obviously can go with the Sea Guard one if you wanted to give evasive to a unit of Sea Guard. That's not a bad choice. You could go for the Trace and Hunter if you particularly wanted to have just a bit of a tankier foot character, or you really like the model. For me, I think the Noble is the way to go because you can put it on a Tyrannok Chariot. It's a light chariot. That means that it can join 2 units. It's a 50 by 100 mil base size, which means it slots perfectly into infantry. Or you can put it on the side of the unit of Silver Helms, which is not as ideal, but you've got a lot of movement, so you can play around with it, and it's okay. Loadout-wise, pretty simple, I think. It comes in at under 300 points if you want to go for like a tanky Tyrannok Chariot to attach to your units. So you give them Tyrannok Chariot, Seed of Rebirth, give them a 5-up regen, give them a Charm Shield, just for that 1-up 5-up ward. Sometimes that's going to be really useful. And then as well, if you just give them Lance, Full Plate and Shield, or Great Weapon, if you want to have them bunkered in a unit of infantry, I think that's a really solid loadout, or you could go with Sword of Might if you wanted to go hand weapon and shield and a foot unit, something along those lines. Gives you a T5 model with 6 wounds, a 3-up armor save, a single 5-up wound save for an ogre blade attack or something like that, and then a 5-up regen as well. So it should just keep you alive for a little bit longer, which is always appreciated. What about having a character mounted on something like a griffin or a phoenix or even a sun dragon? Is that worth doing? Because you can get them up to T6 or T7 with the Frostheart Phoenix. Maybe. It gets quite expensive. It's 105 points to give them the BSB and the +1 toughness banner. So it's a big buy-in. It's a little difficult to justify. But if you're going to do it, I think the Seaguard Garrison Commander might be the way to go, because you can take a Griffin. Obviously, you're paying 130 points there, taking up to 240. And that gives you evasive and fire and flee. Weirdly, you get that even though you're mounted on a dragon. So being able to evasive away from shooting with a T6 monster is not too shabby, something that's quite nice. You can avoid a lot of that sort of poison shooting that might be in the meta at the moment. And loadout-wise, you probably just want to give them something like Dragon Helm, Cedar Rebirth, and a Charm Shield, or an Enchanted Shield. So you've got a reasonably tanky character without breaking the bank, but it does get quite pricey. I think for the Griffin version of the Seaguard Garrison Commander, you're looking at, I want to say, 370 odd points, which is pretty pricey. You can do the same with a Noble, shaving 20 points, which is, fine. And if you don't have access to the Garrison Commander, that's probably the way that you do it. Or you could go for a Frostheart Phoenix, but if you're doing that, you're going to be paying 440 odd points, which is not that much, because sure, you're T7, but you've only got 5 wounds. You get 2 + 3 for the Phoenix, and it doesn't go as far as you might think. So for me, I think this is a bonus that you really want to put on a character that joins into a unit as opposed to anything else. But let me know if you're testing it out on, say, a Griffin. A Griffin makes more sense to me. I could see it on a Griffin. Let me know if you're having success with that. I'm interested to see how people are playing it. This is my favorite time when new rules come out, and it's the time for exploration and testing and finding out what sort of things that work best, what's most fun. Thank you for watching. Thank you for getting to the end of the video. If you've reached this point and you haven't already, I would really appreciate a like, a comment, a subscription if you haven't done those things. It just helps me get seen by more people, boost me up in the algorithm, all of the stuff that the YouTubers do like to say. If you would like to support me in my goal to become a full-time YouTuber, I would absolutely appreciate that. You can become a member below. There are various perks to those, name at the end of the videos, all that good stuff, but it also unlocks some VIP areas in Discord if you become a Longbeard or Ground Knight tier supporter. Those VIP sections are the only parts that are locked away in Discord. You don't have to be a member to join the Discord. I'd recommend that you should. We've got about 450, 500 people on there. It's a great place for discussion, a lot of fun. I do try and chime in as much as possible. And it's also where the Fix My List show lists are put, and also if you are one of the Ground Knight or Longbeard tier supporters, where you participate in choosing which list I play in the monthly Pick My List series.